and titled, and here's the book. This is available over Amazon. So, in many details, goes into a lot of detail of many subjects I can only touch upon today. Here is the presentation of an overview. On the left side we have a German sculpture, on the right side an American, and you can see at one look how different they are. And this is the whole point of my presentation. Here are the two. Why did I concentrate on Italy? Italy was both ally and foe of the Axis and the Allies. And in 1943 Italy chose the winning side. But the liberation of Italy by the Allies cost a lot of lives. America lost about 40,000, of which 12,000 are buried in Italy, and Germany lost over 100,000, and they're all buried in Italy. So it was a very bloody encounter. Here on the left-hand side we have the main cemetery of the US in Anzio Nettuno, which is near Rome. It was erected on the battleground proper. The Allies landed there in January 1944. On the right-hand side we have the last cemetery of Germany on Italian soil, on the Futa Pass, which is the most masterful in my view. You see the difference in time. America could immediately build cemeteries because they were the victor, and Germany had to wait for a concord with the Italian government before it was allowed to erect cemeteries. Now notice that the styles are completely different. Now, and this difference, what does it tell us about the style? Talks about really the message. And as an art historian, I'm going to tell you analyze the style and what it tells us about the different situations of the two countries after World War II. And as an art historian, I looked at the architecture, the sculpture, the painting, the mosaics, emblems, landscape design, tombstone, grave fields, entrance gates, water features, a very complex design. And the ideology is in both similar to give meaning to soldiers' death, but as I will show, the meaning was different in both cases. And by nature they are ideological, of course. In giving meaning to something, you create an ideology. Here again, in general terms, I can refer to the language, aesthetic and ideological of the victor here on the American side, and the language of the vanquished. Our cemetery is on the ground where the battle occurred, and I look at these, since it's a historical institute, as two examples as the artistic equivalent of like the founding documents of the transatlantic world order that emerged after World War II. America in winning and being walking in the future, and Germany having lost and having to find itself again. Here, the ABMC is the agency behind the erection of the American cemeteries. Their mandate was to build cemeteries abroad. They did that, 14 of them after World War II, a few others after World War I. And it's had a very strong military presence. It was an independent agency, but was funded by the Congress and had a strong presence of the military. And this image tells it all. That's General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff under Roosevelt, and later Secretary of State under Truman. He stands here at the spot where his stepson would be buried at Anzio, together with General Thomas North, the Secretary of the ABMC. The cemetery then was an official governmental project. And all archives and the style itself tells us that the ABMC cemeteries want to be a showcase of America, a post-war America, and what it had to offer to the world. And in that sense, we could say that the dead soldiers were almost an opportunity to showcase America's presence on the world stage. Now look at the icon or the logo of the ABMC that tells us all about the style and orientation, namely a temple. Then we talk about this. Now, there was already a cemetery on the ground of Anzio Nettuno, where all the casualties had been buried. It was erected by the military, but in America this would have been fine, but it was not good enough for the intention to showcase America and its virtues and its leadership. So this was all dismantled, the cadavers taken out of the graves, and ABMC took over and built this. From this on the same side, except this is 4 times as big. There was a huge land grab going on, and the landowners fought it like tooth and nails didn't help. Marshall could really pull strings and make it happen that the American ABMC could acquire or get huge pieces of land for free by the Italian government. And here, now look at the design. This is a matrix of classicism which all the American cemeteries used. It had an actual design in form of a grass mall. It had access paths bordered by plane trees or other trees led to a classical monument. It has a water feature, with an oversized sarcophagus here, lateral grave fields, designed landscape. It's a little America on foreign soil. And it's like we calls Washington, the Washington Mall, you know. So that is has immediately recognizing value because the design, and it's consistent. It's the matrix all cemeteries followed. It also had a very stately entrance here, inviting you into this little America. It's very nicely designed, and it's a statement. Imagine in this poor and destroyed Italy, it did talk about hegemony, wealth and status and power. It was also a statement in the communists, because the communist power were very strong in Italy after the war. When Anzio Netuno had communist mayors, and the rumors circulated that America was actually building a nuclear site, and the coffins did not contain remains of soldiers but nuclear material. So that was. So these are is the talent of who did this cemetery. I show it because among them, and the ABMC ruled an incredible coincidence or agreement about what constituted a monument and about this style, namely the prevalence and the supremacy of classicism. All shared that assumption, and all had been fellows of the American Academy in Rome. I don't know whether you know about that, but it was founded at the end of the 19th century in Rome in order to allow already trained prominent talents from America to polish off their knowledge. And so they all had been fellows and studied years there and learned things. And here's Eric Gugler, the architect, who then he was commissioned by the ABMC and he hired the others. Paul Manship was also a very famous man. All of them were quite well known at their time, no longer are, except Paul Manship's Prometheus at Rockefeller Center is still in place. And Ralph Griswold, a very wonderful man and a good landscape architect from Pittsburgh. Gilmore Clark, the head of the Commission of Fine Arts, who had a say in the design. We spelled out oftentimes why the classicism represented America best. But there's more to that than that. It's also American at this point in all the letters, and what I can glean from it was that they really felt that America had outdone now its father in style, that they had created a really new American style, the showcase of the best of American art as it was expressed. Here now, this is Gugler's temple. Here we are classicism. That's his vision of noble simplicity and calm grandeur, according to Winkelmann, the famous saying. A Doric facade of gleaming white travertine. It's an eclectic site, nevertheless, as construction, because only the facade is Doric, but behind it is a peristyle in an oval shape, and the Oval Office was, by the way, designed by Gugler in the White House, so he liked the oval. And to the right-hand side there is buildings adjacent, also not completely classical. The right hand is a museum, the left is a non-denominational chapel that are required with each. You find these elements in each cemetery. They're all the same, and in her variations of style, but they're all classical and they all have these elements. Here, and here's a landscape on a totally flat land. Griswold really created a magnificent space with strong elements of these trees. It was so sad that he didn't live to be able to see that. And then a middle ground planting. It's really a feast for landscape architect to analyzed, but look at the graves now. They are arranged in slight arcs and in form of a cross for each, one cadaver each, and these crosses were developed in World War I, after World War I, and they were maintained. There is this continuity in an American mind, the president's thinking. And but critics say that they look like soldiers still stand in muster, in death are still bound to military discipline. No. Now, sculpture in art history is always a good entry to understand the ideology behind something, and this certainly does. This monument is in the center of the monument, is called Comrades in Arms, a bronze sculpture by Paul Manship, and the message is life of the nation goes forward, determined stride into the future. They are more than alive. There's not pietà or any allusion to dead. They have survived the onslaught. And it was panned immediately by art critics. I mean, you could read this. I mean, there was this naturalist style and was just really not welcome at all by the more progressive circles in America. But Griswold called it an inspired work. The group of artists, they all thought this was marvelous. So. Here it's also, and I show this because it shows us how death is again portrayed. Here we have a dead GI with his boots on, but he is carried to heaven. So there is a promise, a hope of resurrection there. The style is very typical. I mean, it's the work of a very trained artist, but it's not maybe our taste any longer. There's a Romanesque and Art Deco, the puffy cloud, and the classical face and facial features, and the counterpoint of the composition. So, but it is quite, I mean, peaceful. It is nice. I'm not giving any value judgments as to the art. So, here and then heavenly, here on the other side, on the chapel's wall, the heaven comes down over the graves, so sort of an angel brings down a wreath of honor. Notice the Star of David. Here now, talking about heavenly spheres again, this is a semi-relief in the dome of the chapel. It's a constellation of stars and planets at the very moment when Allies landed on the ground of Anzio. This was the work by Gugler. This was his idea. He really fought for it, and he even finished it hands-on himself when money was becoming tight. And so was it not Gugler's attempt to connect America's destiny to the heavens? So, and it would take 44,000 years before the constellations of the stars would be exactly the same. So that was the moment of the stars. And Gugler felt very obvious that his generation of Americans represented the hope of humanity. They had a wonderful self-confidence and view. It's only envious as a post-war German could be envious. So this is the museum is obviously ABMC's ideological center in all the cemeteries. And here there are huge maps done by prominent artists at the time showing the progression of the campaign. And so it shows basically it's a celebration of the achievements of the armed forces. And Ron Robin, a writer who got his PhD in Berkeley, he is very critical of it. He called this the tragedy of death of a citizen's army to advance American military prowess, its authority and presence. He had nothing good to say about the cemeteries for that reason. But it's a historical document. They are interesting, and it shows the starting of bombers going to north, to Berlin, to Vienna, and to the oil fields of Romania. And in big letters on big tablets, the campaign is described then in Italian and in English. Now, the presence of the military is definitely undeniably there, because the stars of the armed forces are part of the pattern of the central bed of the so-called North Garden. You see the stars here, and those are permanently rooted into the earth of this hallowed ground. And hallowed means there was a battle. It goes back to Lincoln, as you probably know. And interesting is also that when you are in the space, you can forget that it's a cemetery. It's like a Renaissance garden, and it refreshes you, and you can just enjoy it. And so this is a view on the museum. You see the so-called strict classicism. There are no pillars. That was accepted, pillars instead of columns. That was also accepted by the staunch classicism at the time. Yeah, now another one, the second other one, I show this also, it's near Florence, because within the matrix of classicism you had quite a bit of wiggle room, you see. This is done, it's very different, it has the same elements, a mall, centrality, here it's widening because of the idiosyncrasy of the architect, and the style is not, is strict classicism, and but the most prominent feature here is this pylon, which was really a desire of the architect, and he pushed it through, which responds to this big high flag. So you have already a connection here in America and this memorial. Grave fields are on the side again, and it's sheltered again. It's little America inset into the Tuscan landscape. Here, this is the talent. James Callum Smith, the architect, he was the heir of this firm McKim, Mead and White, very prominent in America. He was an Italophile and a patriot. And Michael Rapuano, the partner of Gilmore D. Clark and Bryant Park, New York City, very, very important person in the restructuring of the city in the 50s under Robert Moses. Here now a close-up of this, the memorial. Here you have this pylon. It recalls certainly the New York World Fair, where you had this sort of trilon and this tapered pylon. It has somehow a modernity about it, and that Smith was definitely more not so staunchly columned as his work as Googler's was. Interesting here is that the wall of the missing here is really the backdrop of this monument. Here you have really immediately a reminder, yeah, this is about dead people. This is about losses of the war. So it's very different from this temple, which could be anything, the temple facade. It's really, the architect was a very fine architect, and even it might not be our taste, but in his intentions, he did a beautiful job. This is one of the atria, because it's open to the sky, this space, and it has a flowing fountain, which makes a wonderful sound when you're there, and everything is gleaming white, and it has wonderful ratios. Ratios was important. I mean, in modern classicism, you had to have Vitruvian ratios still. You couldn't just go do whatever you liked. It had to be all calculated. And beautiful profiles. Here we are in the museum. For example, you have here on the right side one of this description of the campaign. Now, this is very interesting here, the ideological center. Now, the morning. On the other side, there was again the maps were the official side. Here is the more private side, Remembrance, a big mosaic by Barry Faulkner. Light shines from above on a Madonna-like figure. She carries lilies, and there are all spring symbols. This spring as element of hope and renewal. Spring flowers, budding elm trees, and over graves and below. So also the promise of life through national remembrance. Note also the green marble gives also a sense of renewal. Now, Barry Faulkner then was a very famous artist. I won't get into this. He did in the National Archives these two huge frescoes or paintings. You probably have seen that also. And he and many others halved their salary because it was so, they felt it was a patriotic duty to participate. And the money ran short with the ABMC at that time because of the Korean War. Here is now the Angel of Peace. It's another sculpture again. It's expressive of content, and by Sidney Walk, also a very prominent artist at the time. His style classics meets Art Deco and nationalism, and it's a soaringly. And so she soars mournfully over the graves. And can we say, is that an America's message?
Is that at the top of the pylon?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry, yes, I should have mentioned that, yes. It's on top of the pylon. High up, you don't really see it from below.
That's why I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and that was one of the criticisms. Now, the other side shows another side of this peaceful America. We have the fierce eagle. It protects the statue, but it's also threatening and scary. And so it could resent American hegemony backed by military threat. So this, you have the both sides of America's identity in the post-war era. Then the benefactor and also the military occupants. Now we go to the German ones before I get into this, but at one view you see immediately that's a very different world. stylistically and in expression. That's the Futterpass. But let's go back a little bit. It was done by the agency which did all the German ones, is the so-called VDK, the Volksbund Deutsche Krebsfürsorge, means People's Association for the Care of German War Graves. It's important that it's a private organization, always was, and is financed by donations, beginning with elementary school children. Now look at the logo. It shows crosses. Remember, the logo of the ABMC was a temple. So that tells you here is the emphasis is on suffering and death. And yeah. Now, this is the VDK employed one architect as the chief architect. That makes it a very interesting area of study, because he worked under 3 regimes. He made hundreds and hundreds of cemeteries abroad and in Germany, was also cemeteries. And he never had classicism, and his style, as I will show, is medievalism with cubism. He started to build in the Weimar Republic, began with landscape-oriented plans. The Nazi period, we have some examples in Italy, which I will be able to show, because Mussolini and Hitler had an alliance, and then the VDK could erect cemeteries in the spirit of fascism. West Germany, then he had to learn out of moral and physical construction, destruction, construct something new. We will see that in Italy as well. Now this was the VDK was confronted with in both world wars, mass death, 3.5 in World War II, so millions were lying strewn over the landscapes in foreign lands, and Tishler started to design and came up with that. That's the symbolic group crosses. They have no names. This is in a battlefield from World War I, was established 1942. So, but there is no individuality. You notice that in this time. Now we have under Mussolini the sign. This was built in the Alps in Pordoi, which means it's very difficult to get to. It's not inviting like an American one in a flat land. It's really up where Austrians fought, Hungarians fought, Italian soldiers on skis in this very landscape. Awful landscape, awe-abiding. It's not awful, it's very magnificent actually. Now that is a so-called Totenberg, a type of building which means castle of the dead. It's a very, very firm structure, and in the crypt underneath the interior contains then the cadavers. And here's Austrian, Hungarian mostly. And construction was interrupted in 1939. So, but I'd like to bring to your attention the inscription here, which I translated for you, and it's above the entrance here. When you get into this small entrance, beyond time, beyond the mountains, may stone and star-filled heavens bring us closer to your nature's eternity. That means the emphasis is on the collective, so the collective sacrificed itself for the nation, and on the nature's eternity. You had to make some sense, some consolation. In an American ones, it's sort of the heavens, and in the German has a very strong tradition to nature as a metaphysical entity. So nature had to work, to step in, to promise some kind of consolation. And here it's almost the sense of eternity that's going to change after the war. So here's another one by Tishler, a magnificent structure. It's in Quero, also Totenberg type. It has a merciless blank wall, high quality of stone, and medievalism meets cubism, no actual access, and that purity of form. You see the cubism, it's really was quite a masterful architect. He has been deadpanned in Germany because of his Nazi period, but in England there's a great deal of interest in him, and architecture historians want to write about him now and in contact with them. This is the inside, very shortly, the inner sacrum of this Totenberg type, and again we have a similar spirit in the inscription, which runs down here underneath the frescoes of dead soldiers. Here we stand in the ranks of file, as in life together we stood. Again, we have eternity's consolation. Now, natural light falls on an altar. This is a very typical Robert Tishler building he was a master of. An entrance experience which was very very, very staged, and you followed through a dark tunnel oftentimes, and then a wide room, and you had a sequence of spaces. So it became a very emotional experience, which then culminated in this space here. There's a sacrosanctum. Now the last one is Pinzano Tagliamento. I call it really an example of the fascist theatrics. Major earthworks had to be completed before this could be built on. It was meant to be as a crypt. You have a terrace and an entrance building, and then a court behind, a huge court. Underneath would be a huge crypt. Then you had parade grounds and a circus maximum. It was not finished because in ' it was abandoned, and today if you stumble over it, you think it's Roman ruins. Nothing has happened to it. It's just witness to a spirit of superbia. Post-war, VDK then resumes its work. It was very, very difficult. They had to start aesthetically and ideologically of a tabula rasa, and it was a huge mental challenge. I sort of bring in two quotes, one by Werner Lindner, who was kind of also close to Nazi thought, and then after the war repented, I suppose, and became a member of the VDK. And here that he says how the prevalence of the evil spirit was still had such a hold on him. And Rudolf Hillebrecht, an architect who had never been a party member, so he always also acknowledged how terrible it was for designers to get off the political pathos of their thinking. Then the anchor for the VDK was the first sentence of the German constitution: the dignity of the individual is unassailable. That was really the orientation point. Then the meaning of a soldier's death, and it means that the tragedy is not for the nation but for each individual, and each individual is a tragedy, and the family that's the task of mourning belongs to the family. And what was the meaning of it? The meaning was that this death in the millions would be an admonishment to keep peace. And Germany becomes a pacifist nation, as you might know, and the reconciliation over graves is the other logo, meaning former enemies' graves. And Germany becomes an ally with Western democracies, and the dove of peace appears in all their cemeteries. So that's the message, peace. And that is the first one. Now I'm having a few examples. Pomezia was given as a land by the Italian government to build and erected a cemetery, but after 1955 Tishler could remodel this, and it contains 27,433 cadavers, and it has a much higher density, the Multistone Cross density, than the American ones. The Multistone Cross is used throughout German cemeteries and has several names on this side, up to 6, 3 on each side are allowed, just to have enough space. But each soldier is in his own sarcophagus. They are not in a sort of a mass grave, even though there is always the so-called comrades' grave in the German ones. That means soldiers which couldn't be separated were buried together, and strangely enough, they don't exist in the American ones. I'm sure that also happened. I don't know what happened to and why. I have not pursued that issue. Now here, this axle was here already, so the actual design, and Tishler kept it because it leads to the main ideological center of the cemetery, which is in a baldachin. Now, and the baldachin is remarkable because of this sculptural group called the Mourning, and it shows a family. It reminds of the Augustus Ara passes here, the child and the mother, and holding the arm over the dead soldier. So again, the family is mourning and they are frozen in grief. That's the message, a grieving mourning of the family. And there's an inscription which points out that peace in the back. And so now compare this to here, the American one. America looks toward the future. Germany looks to the future, but it's still very insecure, except the Wirtschaftswunder. But emotionally and spiritually, it's a very, very difficult, challenging time for Germany. And there was a lot of sort of mourning to be done. Now it's interesting that because the sculptor who did this here did also this. Fritz Molgenand Eisenwert left this Germany awake, huge sculpture in a Totenberg by Tishler, which no longer exists in Silesia. So it was the figure of a giant about to rise Germany awake, so up to become the conqueror of the world or something. And there's here you have here the faces that frozen in mourning.
When was the one on the left done? Before the Second World War?
Yes, that was during the Nazi time. Yeah, it was. Yeah, and here on the right-hand side, notice the style is non-canonical. Classicism did not play a role in Germany at that point. It was because of Speer, and so it was refuted, and it was more of an abstraction and not following a classical canon in its aesthetics. Now here we have the next one, Casta Mono, dedicated in 1967, 21,920 dead. And here, as you can compare, this is Tischler's hands on the right-hand side still, the chapel, a much more modest building than this on the left, but also allowing, because of his talent, to give it a touch of monumentality through framing the entrance with monolith. I want to point out now the graving, the burial patterns have changed. You have the Tischler's crosses still, but you have also grave markers in the ground which give also individual names. So each soldier has its own grave. All it is very modest, but we have to quickly go inside to make a point here. It's the interior of the chapel. It recalls Tischler's mastery of light, but the message is not muddled. It's very simple. I want to point out the style of that elongated figure. It's moving toward abstraction and generalization. It's a revival of the art of Wilhelm Lehmbruck, who committed suicide in 1919 because of his experience in World War I. He couldn't bear it, and he was considered a degenerate artist by the Nazis. And here we have really a sign that Postwar Germany and the artist retrieved the Weimar Republic pedigree in thought and in art. Here now, this is the Last Tishler. This is a very impressive site. It was built on the request by the town of Cassino. The improvements Germany and Italy had really improved by the time. I put down a few 57 pre-runner to the EU, contracts of Rome, guest workers, Italian in Germany, German tourists in the millions to Italy. Now it recalls, and style-wise, it's not the core mountain, but it looks like it as if it were. It recalls an Etruscan terminal, so it's an eternal kind of shape, or a purgatory of Dante representations. It has no standard style. It's just invented by Tishler. In ellipsoid terraces, you have grey fields. And here you have 222,000 buried, 59 to 65. The hill location was actually favored by the VDK because there is kind of a vestige of the idea that dead should be up near the light, near nature. But interesting here is that it has no monument. I mean, this space really calls out for a monument on the top. And the designers wanted it so much and made many suggestions, but the VDK kind of dragged its feet. It hesitated, I think, for ideological reasons, to put up a monument which could have been seen from far away. So here, now we have the difference in entrance experience. We have left again the anciaux, the open wide. Here, Tishler in Cairo, a cube again by Tishler, and kind of a gaping dark hole. You don't know what expects you there when you go through, but the mystery is solved. Modernism burst in. So the real turn in aesthetics and thought. Interior in travertine is open to the sky. So transparency in architecture for me reflects the transparency of political rule in Germany at that time. And remarkable is this statue group, mourning and consolation. Again, we have personal grief, and again, family consoles over the loss. It has a very famous pedigree. This in here, Mourning Parents by Katie Kollwitz is her personal design. Here, her husband and both are frozen in grief and over the death of their 19-year-old son Peter, who died in the first days of World War I. So that still exists and is like an icon of a personal expression of grief. Now the last one, here's a cemetery built, the Futterpass, 1601 to 69. It has the largest, the 30,000 buried, over 30,000, and most soldiers came from fights over the Gothic line. It's the largest and most expensive of the German cemeteries. It's north of Florence, by the way, about 50 kilometers north of Florence. And it cost a huge sum, 8 million, because of enormous differences, technical and political and so, but the VDK overcame. It was budgeted for 2 million and it ended up costing 8 million. Important here is that nature and man-made has a new symbiosis from a point of view of design. And as Frankfurt Allgemeine wrote, like a patterned gown splayed upon Earth's jacket landscape. And the designer wanted the landscape built into the cemetery, not the other way around. So it is the openness, the interpenetration of the alpine landscape and the Apennine and the dead, the place of the dead, which is really one of the major points here, which you have to bring up. Now you see the model of the Dieter Österlin, the architect who got the commission, testifies to that conception, basic conception. There's no classicism, of course, and he defended that post-war Germany architects did not want to have classicism. He called it the state presenting itself in form of the 34th remake of threadbare classicism. So he considered this freedom a liberation also from the past. So all this, they are really symbolic of developments, intellectual and political developments in Germany. That was my guiding point, inquiry in this work. See, it's wide open to the sky. It was accepted, and here and I compare these two. The concept here is the Imprometa designed landscape, Beaux-Arts tradition based on Versailles, you know, which or the Academy in Rome and our architects and landscape architects adhere to. And here to the right you have this completely revolutionary design. Here is now a short look at that, and it consists basically of a wall, and the whole idea, and the wall starts very small at the entrance building there in the middle ground, and then wraps around the whole hill, and not ending. It's not, and the monument evolves around of the wall. It's not a separate piece. So this is the eternal spiral, and it stands for life itself. And it has irregular linear segments, sections, and then which turn at an angle determined by the topography of the land. Now, and you walk along this spiral wall and up, and it's about 2 kilometers. And you have 3 shortcuts. You can make a short to the monument. But there are no right angles and no calm horizontals. And what the grave fields are on held up by this spiral wall, which serves as a containing wall. And the grave fields have different sizes and aspects, because depending on, again, on the topography. Here is they compare the entrance experiences. When you go to the Futterpass, there's a very simple entrance here, and you start out on your pilgrimage. No more than 2 people can go in. And here, all American ones have, cemeteries have a reception room. This is the one at Imprometa. It shows an idealized American parlor, so you're invited to be comfortable and not shed too many tears. You can just sit there and read in the toilets and who knows what. It's comfortable, welcoming. And this is the experience when you walk along that path, and it's very powerful, I can tell you. It consists, the monument, of stone, the local Petra Serena, sky, earth, and then also water. And the spiral path goes all around. And now when you get, see, this special experience consists of that you never know how it's going to turn. So you walk kind of into the sky and into the open. And the sky is a very, very important part, the clouds and the openness and the views over the Apennine there, which are absolutely magnificent. And here the graves, and nature takes over, that's intended. Then, so natural grass. Then this is the court, the monument's court. Now this is, the lens gives a wrong impression that it's really perpendicular of cut here. And it's totally empty. That's the surprising part, and which really hits you. There's nothing, no monument, no inscription, nothing. And together with the mosaic called Flash of Lightnings, it's the constitute the architecture and the emptiness, and that mosaic constitute the message, which is best expressed by Ursuline himself, a flame-like ornament from black, white and grey natural stones is like a last rearing, working with his own architectural expression. Through the sudden rise and fall of the spiral wall, the sudden end of a soldier's life in war is given form. So the form is the message. It's not an inscription which transmits the message, it's the form, it's the experience. And in my view, it works. When I'm there, I'm just overcome. Now, in that, an Italian theater group performs antique drama every summer there. I saw Antigone last year. It was very powerful. And they moved from space to space in the cemetery. And here, this is the crypt. Soldier's death is passion. That's expressed here by the crown of thorns. Fritz Kühn from East Berlin in the crypt. And behind that wall are this comrade's grave of soldiers whose remains couldn't be separated. And only Christian symbols were permitted to be used, no other insignias of army or anything in the German cemeteries. Now this is, I call that maskless, visualized. You see, when you're there, you cannot forget that this is a soldier cemetery with all these graves and several names on each of these grave markers. But I show it also because look at now the aspect of the monument. Now it looks like a needle. Before it was kind of an ellipsoid, a triangle, a ball, and now we have it, it's small. And that's the key point to the aesthetics and also the message and what it reflects about the time when it was built. It changes, the aspect of the monument changes with every step. And here we are. Like this. This is the same monument, the same, but it's a sculptural architecture and has its effect is a restlessness and ambiguity. Since you can never hone down a firm form. And my goal swear, as Ursuline said, to offer no false pathos. There's a new pathos in the usual form. My vision was to depict the grimness of the fates the soldiers, suffered and to give war no glorification. So it is quite an experience to walk through there because it constantly changes, which is the essence of Expressionism. Again, we're going back to Expressionism, and sure enough, Walter Gropius did also a monument in 1922, which Ursuline surely must have seen, the monument to a leftist group which was killed in 1922. So the retrieval of Weimar art and what it stood for is also become an integral part of Ursuline's new definition of a funerary style. Now this is the last image. There's a certain restlessness. Is it to me that court appeared like an opening or closing book. For me that reflects the ambiguity of silence, and something has not come to rest. And it's true, my generation then soon rebelled against the silence of our parents about the past and against the certain stuffiness of public life. So this is really speaks about this state of mind, of searching for an anchor point. Now let's sum up. Ideology, we have complacency versus uproar, we have Pax Americana, and we have Germany's example, the ambiguity, and modesty and mourning, and Germany's goal wants to get along with the world. The commemoration of death, the US death, is sanitized. There is no allusion to the agony of being wounded, of dying, of killing your fellow man. It's all kind of glorified. And historical experience in Germany emphasizes private mourning. It stays away from the nation mourning or anything. Nature, the US has tamed nature through landscape design. Germany mostly uses untouched nature as an agent of consolation. Style, the US pursues pervasive classicism. Germany moves from Teutonic medievalism toward modernism, toward abstraction and revival of expressionism. German society became less oriented toward quasi-religious ideologies that the Nazis so readily co-opted. US became more religious and more conservative. The Vietnam memorials temporarily interrupted the stasis then of American official art. That is another subject. Now, as to the post-war world order, the West under US leadership, democracy and a strong military, that's what came from America, the Pax Americana, as mentioned before. Germany is pacifist, reluctantly reestablished its military, working slowly through its part, the crimes and the war, becoming a member of the civilized world in Europe and vis-à-vis the US. Documents then, these are indeed, in my view, documents of the post-World War transatlantic political order that seems to be dismantled at this period, at this point of time. Now, thank you very much. Now I leave this standing, and this is my talk.